A new poll is suggesting that 4 in 10 Canadians are stressed about money. No real surprise there, right? But Equifax is also suggesting that more Canadians are turning to debt in order to deal with higher rates of inflation, which is kind of surprising because if you're stressing about money, the last thing you want to do is have more debt. But it seems like many Canadians just don't know where to turn when it comes to inflation. And the answer is, it's really quite simple. And it's really more of a psychology problem than it is a math problem. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit: product, penalty, price, in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. All right, so welcome back. Today we are discussing inflation and the fact that many Canadians are turning towards debt as a way of dealing with it, which is probably the single most stressful move that people can make. And I'm going to start by saying right here, right now, if money is stressing you out, having more debt is not going to help the situation, and it is not going to make the situation better right now, 3 years, or 5 years down the road. And as I'm preparing for a new program that we're putting together on all things money, what I'm starting to realize is that money, especially in times like this, is more of a psychology problem than it is a math problem. And this comes right on the heels of a new poll showing that 4 in 10 Canadians are stressed about money, and 3 in 10 Canadians are having anxiety issues when it comes to money. And I'm going to give you some suggestions at the end of this video on how to deal with all of that. And the reality of it is it's really not that hard. But again, it's a psychology issue, not a math issue. I'm going to try to give you some tools in order to deal with this at the end of the video. But before we get into it, do me that favor, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And if you're in one of those situations where you're stressed about money, well, there's an opportunity to win $5,000 by going to 360giveaway.ca. That's where we are taking entries for our 25,000 subscriber giveaway. All you have to do is be subscribed to this channel, fill out the form there. You get extra entries for following me on Instagram and sharing the contest socially, and somebody is going to win that $5,000. All right, so let's get into it. Let's discuss what's going on in the financial world right now. Obviously, the big story is inflation, and I can't emphasize enough that this is the single biggest problem on the minds of most Canadians right now. The second being, of course, interest rates and where they're going, especially for variable rate mortgage holders. So what I want to do is I want to jump you in here and show you the headlines. This is an article with respect to a new survey called the 2022 FP Canadian Financial Stress Index. This was released on Tuesday. And what they are suggesting is that 4 in 10 respondents, or 4 in 10 Canadians, reported that money was their number one stressor, outranking other causes such as health, job, and relationships, which is pretty huge. By the way, one of the biggest problems that relationships face is money. And by the way, one of the ways that we help people determine whether they should be in a variable or a fixed rate is by asking them if one of the members of a couple is going to be stressed out at night and not be able to sleep because they have a payment or an interest rate that could potentially change. And if the answer is yes, we often encourage them to go fixed because that is quite honestly going to be one of the things that's going to put the most stress on their marriage. But what we're seeing here is that 40% of Canadians are seeing that money is the number one stressor, and that has largely to do with inflation. Now, this is no surprise because not only do we have inflation, but we also have the preloaded stimulus from the pandemic that is starting to wear out. So in other words, there was a lot of money created during the pandemic, first and foremost from the government side with stimulus programs, and then that was obviously funded and purchased through the Bank of Canada via government bonds. And what we're seeing right now is that all the savings, all the good things that happen to people financially are starting to go away because people are starting to spend the money that they had saved. And that is basically having all those funds that were deposited into the bank accounts of Canadians basically go to zero. And as a result, now what we're seeing is stuff like this. Canadians keep adding debt to keep up with inflation. And there's some really interesting numbers here. Monthly spending on credit cards rose by 17.5% in the first quarter of 2022. That is a lot. Lenders issued 31.2% more credit cards to consumers in the quarter compared to the same period last year, which means people are more and more turning to credit. The average new limit is $5,500, which is quite high, the highest it's been in 7 years. And the data shows that average Canadians now carry $20,744 in debt, excluding mortgages, which is an absolutely huge amount. But here's where it gets interesting. When you look to the quote down here at the bottom of the page, look at the reasons why they're suggesting that credit is being used for inflation. Pent-up demand and increased travel with easing COVID restrictions combined with soaring inflation have led to some of the highest increases in credit card spending we've ever seen. So here's what they're saying, and here's what is important to take away from this article, is it is pent-up demand. So in other words, people chose not to buy things for basically a year or two during the pandemic, and now the demand for purchasing things has gone up because people want what they want and they're going out and they're buying it. And combine that with travel, which by the way is for most people not a necessity. And we're seeing these higher credit card rates. And here's the thing with all of this is they're setting two things that have nothing to do with needs as the reason why consumers are turning to credit cards. The things that people are charging seem to be more in line with wants than needs. So in other words, things that people don't necessarily need to be spending money on. And we've gone through this pandemic and everybody was really good about not spending any money because they were forced not to. And now that we have a little bit of seemingly freedom, we're spending a ton of extra money. And that ton of extra money is getting turned into debt. And of course, debt is what causes good people to make bad decisions. And what's really interesting here is that even though the prices of food have gone up 10-15%, people are having trouble cutting back by 10 or 15%. They did it in 2020, they did it in 2021, but cutting back on those expenses seems to be something that is not possible all of a sudden. So there's clearly a psychology issue here. And by the way, we've talked about leverage investing in the past on this channel. We've talked about things like the Smith maneuver. And while the Smith maneuver is a great option for some people, and I'm going to suggest it's probably a small number of people, here's the problem with leverage. Leverage is what causes stress. And if you are leveraging to take vacations, or you are leveraging to purchase things that you don't need, or you're leveraging to buy food, or you're leveraging to invest, that creates more stress on your finances. And as prices go up and everything else, I'm going to suggest that probably the biggest stress for most people isn't necessarily the cost of the groceries, but the fact that there's not enough money at the end of the paycheck at the end of the month because you have things like credit card payments to make, or car loan payments to make, or line of credit payments to make. In fact, the number one thing and the most important thing people could be doing right now is doing everything they possibly can to get rid of debt payments. I've talked about getting rid of car loans in the past on the channel. And to me, the number one way that you can get rid of the stress that you have, especially in a household, is by getting rid of those car loans and basically taking something like a $55,000 SUV, selling it, getting rid of the car loan, and maybe buying a $5,000 or $10,000 vehicle that might be a little bit used, or that might be smaller that you're used to, or that may not have the heated seats or the heated steering wheel, and use that vehicle to rid yourself of the financial stress that comes along with inflation. Because there's a really good chance, like I said, that the problem isn't the inflation, the 5 to 10% higher food prices, it's the $800 Audi payment. And by the way, here's a really good exercise for people who have 2 automobile households. Take your payments, not just for the one car, but for the second, add it up, then add up all of your insurance costs, then add up all of your gas bills, then add up all of your maintenance costs, and see what the total cost of actually owning those vehicles is. And what you'll find is that it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000. Now, if you could get rid of $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 in payments every single year, would the fact that that roast beef costs an extra $5 to $10 really be as big of an issue for you? And the chances are it won't. So here's the thing, is if inflation's a stressor for you, you need to first and foremost take a look at your debt. Then you need to go, okay, is it realistically possible for me to trim 10 to 15% of my costs if I had to? And for most people, it absolutely is. In fact, most people are going to be able to trim their costs 20 to 25% or 30%, and they did this during the pandemic. So this is something that is possible for people. You don't have to live at this lifestyle. You can choose to live at this lifestyle, and that will eliminate a lot of the stresses financially. Now, one other thing to note is that many Canadians are getting better at budgeting. Now, budgeting is something that is difficult for a lot of personality types. It's not something that is done often or frequently, which is why most people don't do it. It's boring, it sucks, and you don't really want to have to do it unless you need to. And even if you need to, it becomes very, very hard to do. So here's what I'm going to suggest is one thing that the wealthy do is they pay themselves first. And I know pay yourself first, it's this thing in personal finance that everyone talks about, but whether you want to call it pay yourself first or profit first or just being smart about your money, one of the single best things that you can do is take 10% off of your paycheck every single month and have it automatically go to a bank account and more specifically, an investment account where it automatically gets invested and is out of your wallet. Then take the rest of the money and subtract the expenses that you know that you have. Your home payment, your taxes, your condo fees if you have them, your heating bill, your car payment, the things that you know you are absolutely going to have to pay for every single month. And by the way, if you take 10% of your income and put it aside and you look at the things that you absolutely have to pay for every single month, and there's more payments there than there is money left at the end of your paycheck, well, you need to make some lifestyle adjustments, and that's obvious. It's not rocket science, it's just reality. And then once you've calculated all those payments, that's going to give you the money that you have left for things like groceries and things like entertainment and so on and so forth. And then your job basically for the next 2 to 3 years as inflation comes around is figure out how to spend that money as wisely as possible. And when you know that you've only got $50 or $100 or $200 that week to spend at the grocery store, you're probably going to be a lot more specific and a lot more smart about how you spend it. And that's as simple as it gets. This is how big businesses operate, right? They look at the amount of revenue that they expect to have on a monthly basis. They take a certain percentage and they set it aside and say, this is the amount of profits that we are projecting. And then they figure out how to budget off of that. It's really not rocket science. It is really simple. And the key thing here again is that money is not a math problem. It is a psychology problem. And the thing that you have to figure out from a psychology standpoint is how to go about spending your money wisely. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. Don't forget about that race to 25,000 subscribers, and we'll see you on the very next one. Cheers.